million people who are still relying on polluting fuels and technology for cooking, which is about 1/4 of the world's population. And in sub-Saharan Africa only, this deficit is growing by about 14 million people every year. So this is definitely a big impact. And the climate impact is also quite significant in terms of GHG emissions, as well as in terms of the impact not only on climate, but also on health, on development, as well as on gender issues. So it is part of the, it's a livelihood issue. And of course, climate is part of it, but definitely not the only element of that one. Big challenge, of course, when we talk about clean cooking and in developing economies particularly, is the financing gap, which is quite significant because this type of technology is not always affordable for our ultimate clients, poor population, poor households living in rural and urban areas. And I understand that less than 20% of national clean cooking plans are currently backed by clear financing mechanisms. So this is also a financial issue. And if you take the kind of big picture, the closing gap is about $25 billion a year if we were to address the clean cooking challenge worldwide. And the actual commitment related to clean cooking is less than $200 million. So again, huge gap between what it would be needed to address this funding, this health, climate and livelihood issue and the financing gap against that. Now, of course, in this kind of pretty, I would say, a dark picture, good to mention, of course, the work of the World Bank, including ASCENT, the Accelerating Sustainable and Clean Energy Access Transformative Program, which is, as you know, part of the Mission 300, one of the 7 flagship initiatives in the World Bank, which is targeting to 20 million households for clean cooking solutions, particularly in Eastern and Southern Africa. So where do we sit? Where do we fit as a carbon finance solutions here? This is very much trying to create and mobilize additional funding that will ultimately reduce or at least increase the affordability of clean cooking. And this is where carbon credits could be seen as a kind of byproduct if they can be produced at low cost. That again will generate additional funding. Now, it's easy to say, it's not easy to do. And this is not a simple and automatic process. And again, being able to embed from the very beginning carbon solutions and carbon finance solutions in a program like that is something that will make it sustainable and that will make it to some extent affordable moving forward. And again, I mentioned the work we've been doing with CDEV and now the ASCENT program. This is very much, there are very much 2 interesting examples where we've been able to embed, in fact, this kind of carbon finance component into a larger product. Now, beyond finance, of course, we're also facing some multiple challenges, including integrity, including, of course, overcrediting and the reliability of the monitoring system. So again, it's not an easy process. The infrastructure, physical and legal infrastructure around that is quite sometimes challenging, but is necessary if you want to be able to produce high integrity carbon credits and hence sell something that will be valued by potential buyers. So standards, digital MRV are all these kind of tools I think we're going to discuss today that will also create something that will move from a carbon asset to financial asset. And again, this financial asset is important in order to mobilize financing. So all of that is very much about climate smart development. Let me share as a conclusion a very personal note. I was in Ethiopia last year as part of the CDEV annual visit, and we did visit a rural household in Awassa, in rural Ethiopia, and it was great to see that they've been able through the work of the World Bank to build a biogas digester that is providing not only clean cooking but also electricity and also improving crops. So again, very concrete example where I saw myself, this family being able to live in a much better conditions, thanks to access to this kind of clean energy, including on clean cooking. So in conclusion, I know that the agenda is quite busy. Maybe 3 things I like this session to reflect on. One is how can we generate high integrity carbon credits from clean cooking projects? What are the kind of key barriers, the key roadblocks we need to address? And let's be very transparent on that. It's not an easy journey, as I said. The number 2 is about the challenge of overcrediting. And we all have in mind, headlines in some newspapers about, companies sometimes tending to overcredit some of their programs for good or bad reasons, but it is challenging, and it is creating some environmental challenges. And last but not least, again, this kind of carbon revenue will be only one of the multiple sources to some extent to close this funding gap. So how can we use it efficiently to leverage even additional private capital to close this funding gap? So a lot to discuss. So I've been a bit long, but I wanted to share my own thoughts. So back to you, Michelle, for this very interesting session today.
Thanks so much, Olivier. I think you touch on so many interesting topics that will be covered for the speakers today. So we really appreciate that. So just, as you mentioned, the experience has shown that carbon credit has been a very important, but not a standalone solution for us on clean cooking, and depends on the different enabling elements to make it work. And it needs to be, if well designed, it can be very powerful instrument for leveraging clean cooking and affordability. And as you mentioned, I think one thing that's interesting for us to think, that's the difference of carbon markets as well. This mix between compliance and voluntary system, that's also something that usually the clients ask us, what is it, what's the difference? And what's the voluntary, the Article 6.2, the Article 6.4, and also the idea of authorization, without authorization, public-led, private-led. So carbon markets is still a group of things that we need to explore. And I think it's very important, as you mentioned, the high quality of the clean cooking and the methodologies. And you have today people that you're discussing exactly that. And just to mention in terms of size, right? Because the carbon credits were in 2023, for instance, it was kind of there is an estimation of more than 90% of the investment was based on carbon. And then we have a decrease with this discussion and then the change on the methodology, but has been a big part of it. And also, if you think in terms of numbers, this can represent millions of dollars investment on clean cooking, right? So with that, we have a busy agenda, as you just mentioned. I just don't want to. I want to give this the space for our speakers today, and we will start to talking about the generation of the carbon credit itself. We will be talking about. We will have with us the Clean Cooking Alliance. We will have with us Louisburg University, that's part of MAX, the Modern Energy Cooking Service. And we will have with us the GCC, which also, I think that's three big players on this development of the methodology. So you have a big opportunity for that. And I just want to remember the importance of this methodology to start this discussion, because just to have an idea of scale, the voluntary carbon market today, it's estimated about 2 or 4 billion US annually, depends on the year and how we're looking at that. And we look that it can be achieved about 24 billion by 2030, which is a very important number for clean cooking, but it's relatively small if you compare with the general carbon pricing revenues, which the bank has estimated at about 100 billion in 2024. So this is still a small part of this big potential climate revenue. And the increase of this carbon credit depends critically on the strength of integrity and the trust. And that's where the methodologies and the implementation of the methodology is so important. The inclusion of clean cooking as part of a compliance market is a policy choice, and it varies country by country. But all of them, independently of, I think there is difference of the different carbon markets, but they all need some level of methodology and process to actually have trust, and you can have a price. So with that, I want to thank you everybody to be here on this discussion. Please use the chat for questions and for interacting. We are building this community, and they are a growing community with a really good discussion. So we welcome you very much to include on the chat. And I start by welcoming Elisa Derby, who is a Senior Director of Research, Evidence and Learning on Clean Cooking Alliance with a large experience on that topic. So thank you so much for being here with us, Elisa.
Thank you, Michelle and Olivier and the whole rest of the team for organizing today. I have some slides that I'll walk us through, so I think those will be shared momentarily. But in the meantime, I'm excited to be here on behalf of both the Clean Cooking Alliance and the Clean Cooking and Climate Consortium, which is a group of 6 organizations whose logos you will all see on the screen momentarily as soon as we get the slides shared, that are the co-authors or facilitated the development of the CLEAR methodology that I'm going to be discussing over the next few minutes, which is the Comprehensive Lowered Emission Assessment and Reporting, CLEAR, methodology for cooking energy transitions. But I'm just going to be referring to it as CLEAR as we go forward. I might pause now and just wait for the slides to get loaded so I don't get too far ahead of the presentation.
Just give me a second. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. You can see it now.
Excellent. So the consortium is the group of 6 organizations whose logos you see across the bottom of the screen. And we can move to the next slide. And so I'd like to start out talking about CLEAR by how it came to be, because I think that's a really important part of the story. 4C was approached by a group of project developers at the Clean Cooking Forum in 2022 who were really concerned about the carbon market and their role in it, because they were developing these high integrity projects, but to do so had to ignore loopholes that existed in the then methodologies that would have allowed them to overcredit, whereas they felt like they were competing against other actors out there who might be taking advantage of those loopholes and the lack of transparency required, and said we really need a new methodology developed for our sector, by our sector, facilitated by a neutral body that raises everyone up on the playing field, closes the loopholes, and increases requirements for transparency. So that's what 4C set out to do, and intending this to be one methodology that everyone could adopt across the voluntary and compliance markets. And what's happened is actually something even better, which is that we've developed this one methodology, but then pieces of the approach are showing up in all other methodologies across the board. So we've been able to take the power of the clean cooking and carbon community, put together a consensus-based approach to high integrity and high transparency, and have multiple methodologies that are now using these approaches that were developed by the community itself, which is pretty exciting. So what are these approaches? Why is CLEAR special? We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, this is the first public goods methodology. There we go. Which means that it can be used by any standards body in both the voluntary market and under Article 6. So it's currently available for use under 6.2. It's being evaluated for use under 6.4. And it was developed, as I said, by the community, including through support from over 250 researchers, project developers, standards bodies, ratings agencies, carbon buyers, everyone across the clean cooking community and the carbon community. That we had multiple stakeholders with extensive expertise across both over the course of 2.5 years. We really intended, and I think have been successful in incentivizing best practices as well as mandating really best practices, including direct in-home fuel consumption measurements. And we've been able to prioritize accuracy over conservativeness because over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been extensive scientific advancement in the data that's available for us to base these decisions on. is just much better than it was in the past. Prior methodologies didn't have this evidence base to draw from. So we're coming at the right time with the right intentions to be able to really pull this all together, including guardrails and places where we making sure that there are there's not over-crediting happening. And this has happened over the course of 2024 and 2025. We had multiple rounds of public comments and revised the methodology multiple times, responding to all of those over 1,400 public comments at this period. Next slide. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of how CLEAR works. It's a total inventory-based approach, which means you look at the total baseline emissions, the total project emissions, any leakage, and that's how you calculate the emissions reductions. Next slide. And we use two different streams that feed into how the approaches work. And so that emissions reductions are calculated slightly different for projects that are continuously tracked energy consumption, CTEC, or non-CTEC. And when we started CLEAR, we looked around at all the existing methodologies and all of the best practices that had been, that were available for us to review. And we said, okay, there's really these two categories, CTEC and non-CTEC. And for the CTEC projects, gold standards metered and measured methodology already existed and was already very good. No need to reinvent the wheel. So the foundation of the CTEC approach is gold standards metered and measured methodology. And we, of course, gold standard and MEX were both intimately involved in the development of CLEAR. So we were able to use that as a foundation and build a little onto it, which interestingly now is being built, proposed for the revisions to MECD. And then, and really the distinction is for CTEC, it's the project fuel or energy is measured continuously directly on all project technologies in all households, and non-CTEC is anything else. So you could have a liquid or gas fuel that's non-CTEC because it's only measured in a subset of houses. All of the biomass-based projects generally are non-CTEC unless they're pellets and you're tracking fuel consumption, for example. Next slide. And really, we looked across all of the literature and what we were hearing from project developers for over-crediting risks. And these are the issues that we sought to solve. And then shortly thereafter, other researchers also confirmed that these were the highest risks for over-crediting. So I'm not going to go through this slide in detail because I'm going to walk through all of each of these six one by one so we can move on. So past over-crediting has been in large part attributed to estimating fuel consumption or fuel savings in fuel consumption through self-reporting, where people are telling you how often they're using their stove or how much fuel they're using. And so that is not allowed under CLEAR. You have to directly measure fuel consumption in all cases, whether you're doing CTEC through metering or non-CTEC through kitchen performance tests. It has to be directly measured. And even if you're doing a kitchen performance test, there's a risk of the Hawthorne effect, which is the effect where people behave differently when they know they're being watched. This is a phenomenon across all peoples, all cultures, all time. And so the CLEAR methodology, and now many others, incorporates an adjustment for that, where you have to either measure that effect directly, right? You're using stove use monitorings during the KPT and for the month after to see if there's a change when people aren't around, or you're taking a deduction to your emissions reductions. And we're also flagging baseline fuel consumption measurements, even when directly measured, that are suspiciously high. And so that we have a system of caps and flags where if the measurements exceed a certain flag, there has to be justification for why that might be. For example, if your project is in Latin America where plancha stoves are used and fuel consumption is actually quite high compared to other parts of the world, that would be your justification. And we all know that project stoves do not usually completely replace the baseline stove. We all engage in what we call stacking, where we're using multiple fuels or multiple technologies to do our cooking. And so the direct measurements address or account for stacking in CLEAR and don't assume total transformation. Next slide. Having more households that are part of the user group than you would expect is also a potential risk. So CLEAR mitigates that by using project technology days that are capped based on customer support actions that have been shown to increase adoption rates, or through the use of, again, stove use monitors. So we're keeping an eye on all of the factors that might contribute to overcrediting. And then finally, the fraction of non-renewable biomass is a factor that we know contributed to overcrediting in past projects where the science was not yet available for us to have accurate FNRB accounting, and the CDM tool 30, which most projects use to calculate their FNRB, was very complicated to use, included inputs that most project developers didn't have access to, and lots of loopholes to err on the side of a higher FNRB, like 90%, which we know is not the case almost anywhere in the world now. So CLEAR was the first methodology to outrule the use of CDM tool 30, which is now being withdrawn, and require the use of MOFIS, which is a modeling, the modeling fuel wood scenarios model, and that is now becoming standard across the board as a requirement for FNRB calculations. Next slide. So right now, CLEAR is undergoing multiple rounds of review. As I mentioned, for Article 6.4 and Gold Standard. You'll hear from GCC later about their modification of CLEAR for the World Bank. Open Carbon Platform is also reviewing it. And as I said, it's currently available on the CLEAR website, which will be on the next slide, for use under Article 6.2. Once it is published, one of those places, ICVCM, is on standby to review it for carbon CCP eligibility, and it will be available, as I said, to anyone who wants to use it. In parallel, we are developing a web version of CLEAR, so you don't have to use a clunky offline spreadsheet to do your calculations. You can use an interactive online platform, and also a web version of MOFIS that lets users input their own parameters instead of just using the MOFIS-derived default values. We're also finalizing the appendices for how to apply CLEAR to institutional and commercial cookstove projects, and obviously building training materials and capacity building activities for CLEAR application across the website. And I can put in the chat my email address and the website for the CLEAR methodology, and look forward to the rest of our discussion this afternoon and any follow-up after the webinar. Thanks again so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Elisa, for this comprehensive and yeah, it's very organized way to tell this story and the importance of CLEAR. Thank you so much, and we hope to have you on the discussion. If there is any question to Elisa, please include on the chat. She has been the one of the main leads on this, so she's the one. If you have questions, I guess that's a good opportunity for us. So thank you. And with that, I would like to invite our the next speakers. That's Samir Thapa, which research associate of Loughborough University inside of the Modern Energy Cooking Service, who has Modern Energy Cooking Service has been working on especially on the methodology for a long time now, and has been working on all the things related with the gold standard initial methodology of the methodology. Sami, were with us?
Yeah, Michelle, thank you so much for that very nice introduction. Can we lay out the presentation, please? And also wanted to thank Elisa for giving the background on the clean cooking methodologies development. And yeah, help me to go further in terms of particularly our work with respect to developing the methodology that Elisa mentioned on metered and measured energy cooking devices with the gold standard and initially with the climate impact partners. So yeah, I think this is a good progression in terms of my presentation, and finally into, I guess, the new work, largely within the digital framework, more nuanced work within the digital framework on the clean cooking methodologies by GCC, I guess. Can we load my presentation? Or?
Yeah. Just give us a second.
Yeah, if you could get the presentation view. That. Yeah. So yeah, I'll start my presentation. Hi all, I'm Samir Thapa. I'm working with the financing team within the MEX program, and we are located at Loughborough University. So my focus and our focus within the financing team is on carbon methodologies development, and I am also, supporting the team with respect to analysis around the Article 6 developments. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to speak about the aspects of digital MRB in terms of what we did and how digital tools particularly can improve the accuracy and reliability of carbon credit systems, leading towards its overall integrity. And so far, our focus has been on metered, or as Elisa mentioned, continuously tracked users data. That's how it has been coined in the CLEAR methodology going forward. So, and beyond that, we are also looking at other potential impacts of clean cooking and thinking about future directions for digital MRB development around those. Next, please. So, Elisa also touched upon that a little bit earlier. With respect to conventional monitoring, reporting, and verification, they have this huge challenge in terms of the integrity, also with the wider carbon markets. And despite historically low credit prices and relatively high project costs, these projects remain viable, even though with low credit prices and relatively high project costs. However, confidence in these carbon credits has been shaken by several specific scandals and then wider criticism of various aspects of practice. And at the heart of these concerns is the reliance on surveys of a sample of users to gather evidence for the baseline and then for the project periods. So in terms of the integrity, surveys suffer from several issues, including recollection errors by the users, and also was mentioned earlier with respect to Hawthorne effects. In addition, more importantly, the surveys generally and the sampling needed for them leaves room to manipulation by the project. So, but surveys also come at considerable effort and cost for project developers. So we have a system, at the moment that generally costs more, but doesn't produce data that is seen as high quality. And MEX aim to restore trust by leveraging digital users data that in many cases were already being used in the PAYGO type schemes to improve accuracy. So such real users data is now central to integrity, and so is pursued independently of the PAYGO schemes. And although the opportunity for multiple benefits for digital data remains. Next, please. Can you go to the next slide? There's a bit of a mix-up here. Yeah, I mean, this is, as was mentioned earlier, this is the major contribution that MEX has made in terms of the methodology development. This is called the metered and measured energy cooking devices, also better known as MMECD methodology. We developed this in collaboration with Climate Impact Partners and Gold Standard. It uses real usage data. It's either from the meters on stoves or through sales records for fuels to estimate the GHG reductions more accurately and cost effectively than traditional surveys. The avoided baseline fuel is back calculated from the project device using evidence on the relative energy performance of baseline and project devices through the clean cooking protocol called the controlled cooking test. And then this approach is now, being used by various standard bodies in the VCM, and as I also mentioned earlier, and in the CLARE, and then possibly into the GCC as well. So metered approaches are central to the cooking methodologies approved by the Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon market under the core carbon principles as well. And it is recommended methodology by the team at University of California, Berkeley, based upon the paper on pervasive overcrediting. So now it is gaining traction in the market with premium prices being achieved for verified clean cooking technologies. Now, can you please go to the previous slide? No, the previous one. Yeah. So this is our view of the overall flow of information, and also, in terms of how carbon revenues through the clean cooking projects. The integrity, as mentioned earlier, the integrity of claims for carbon credits and other impacts starts from accurate measurement of device use and displacement of the baseline fuels at the project developer level first. And then in many cases, that is being achieved by use of, IoT devices for real-time monitoring, and that allows automated reporting to reduce the manual errors and or deliberate tampering, which provides transparency to build stakeholder trust. But this all requires, robust data security, and in that case, the new technologies like blockchain or other technologies could be useful. Here, I would like to highlight another important benefit of this digital approach to MRV and overall data and monetary flows. It becomes easier to give feedback to users and hence develop incentives for higher usage of clean cooking methodologies, thereby maximizing the environmental and social benefits. And I'll elaborate that a little bit more with the next slides on the examples of some of the use of these methodologies. Can you go to the next slide, please? The next one. So this is the project by EcoSafi that uses MMECD. This is projects uses a measured, is an example of a measured cooking project. It shows that high integrity carbon credit, how does they look in practice? And it's the first project, issuing credits using 100% measured customer data. And it uses digital tracking of the fuel cells to monitor real usage. And also the other significant advancement through this project is that they use individual customer baselines, whereas many of the projects are using, average baselines. So the project was able to secure, the first, the BJRO's, which is a rating agency, its first A rating for a cookstock project, with credits being sold at a premium of around, $35 US. So the key takeaway is that, better data then leads to better high integrity and then to higher prices. Next, please. So this is the other example, particularly with respect to the use of electric cooking devices. In this example, MEX partnered with ATEC to pilot this methodology using IoT-enabled induction stoves in Bangladesh and Cambodia. So ATEC has negotiated premium prices for this and other projects in Africa through pre-sales of credits, providing them with important working capital. And can you please click again? So, the other aspect of this project is related to this revenues going back to the users. Fair revenue sharing from projects has become a central requirement also within the Article 6. But before that emerged, ATEC was already pursuing this, using the digital capabilities to monitor individual usage and feedback via an app. And they tried several different incentives types, but finally settled on returning gas to the user, proportional to the cooking activity, And then that's when the project was coined as, called the Cook to Earn project. Next, please. So the last topic I wanted to raise was, in relation to how the digital method could be used beyond only carbon accounting. The carbon standards all seek to reflect those and, incentivize project developers to think about other SDGs. But in most cases, they remain as co-benefits to mitigation of long-term greenhouse gases. There have been notably attempts to create dedicated standards, example for health outcomes, but those have proven costly to implement in practice and have been hardly used. And hence there is a vicious circle with lack of markets to create value. Hence the co-benefits remain simply layered onto the carbon projects, looking to add some attraction to buyers for those credits, but with very, kind of simple evidence required. So this slide highlights the common SDGs targeted by clean cooking projects, such as climate action, which is SDG 13, and health improvements, which is SDG 3, and also responsible consumption, which is SDG 12, and the affordable clean energy, which is SDG 7. And there's very little effort also undergoing with respect to biodiversity, which is SDG 15, or also under SDG 5 on gender equality. And within health, the evidence of beneficial outcomes relies on self-reports of reduced symptoms. So the required level of evidence in terms of quantifying those different SDG benefits has not been there so far, but there has been little efforts. So we're looking forward to kind of enhancing the use of digital solution platforms to develop that aspect further. Next, please. So in terms of looking ahead, as I mentioned earlier, the agenda for digital MRV includes, continuous refinement of the methodologies to enhance the integrity. And at the moment, this is being driven also by the UNFCCC through Article 6 activities. But that it seems like there always remain tensions between integrity and cost effectiveness. And a current debate is whether it is possible to require metering capability of all stoves, but with only partial monitoring, in terms of reducing the cost. And the sampling in terms of it being truly randomized, and also reduce then the data handling and collection costs. But there is also a growing focus on capturing multiple SDGs, as I mentioned earlier, and MEX will be finalizing a number of its ongoing works, particularly related to methodologies for black carbon, health, and gender impacts. And our focus has been mainly on the project end of the DMRV chain. But then we're also now looking at integrity and cost effectiveness for the entire system. So we are widening our efforts. Part of that will be through collaboration with World Bank via its Accent and IGP HF program, but especially through our new program called ECUASA, which is funded by the CCAC. So there are a couple of initiatives that's going on. And MEX is at the moment particularly focusing on enhancing or building upon the infrastructure laid through MECD to focus on wider SDG benefits. Next, please. Yeah, and thank you for listening. So I provide my contact details over there. As mentioned earlier, would be looking forward to discussing during this session and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sapi. I think that the digital MRV has a so important role to play, and especially what you mentioned, it can deliver premium prices, which it's very important, and how to apply it, right? And implement it in the programs, something that's very important to explore and to understand the cost also of these technologies and how it will be implemented. So I really appreciate that. And with that, I ask all the speakers, you and all the speakers, to take a look on the chat. If there is any question, please, if you can answer there, that would be very appreciated. So for that, our next speaker now, it was mentioned before by the colleagues, it's GCC, it's Sanjeev Kumar, Director on Methodology. So you're very welcome. I see your slides.
Can you see?
Yes, that's good.
Okay.
Perfect.
Actually, GCC has received this mandate to develop this methodology last year from World Bank, and this was developed for Ascent Development Program. We had 3 different priorities to develop for this methodology, and one of the tasks which Elisa has already covered, that we had to address the issue of overissuance under the previous methodologies. So we had the mandate to develop this methodology under high integrity carbon credit, and to make it efficient to issue the credit at least in the real time. And another assignment mandate we had to develop this methodology was to align the clean cooking methodology to Article 6.4. So we started developing this methodology with these 3 intentions. We reviewed all methodologies available at that point of time in the market. We took the feedback from the project developer and the other public stakeholders, and then we tried to maximize the performance and how it could be the high integrity methodology. So I start with what this methodology covers, and I will also go into more detail what this methodology is different than what with respect to other methodologies. So I start with what this is applicable to. So this methodology is applicable to all kind of cooking devices which has been transited from traditional fuel to improved cooking stoves. So it could be renewable or non-renewable biomass. It could be solar-based cooking devices. It could be electrical power cooking devices, or it could be LPG-based cooking devices. So in all kind of activities, this methodology is applicable. What the important safeguard this methodology is going to cover, it gives a unique device ID to all the cooking devices, and as well as this to a specific user. So this avoid any issue of double counting, and that has been the major feature of this methodology. It also defined the clear ownership of the credit, that how and who will be owning these credits. It also requires a continuity of the operation. If any cookie stove is malfunctioning or if it is out of end of life, it has to be replaced with the comparable technologies or either better quality or better thermal efficiency. No overlapping with jurisdictional RAD+. So this is also one of the applicability requirement in the methodology. And there has to be a minimum thermal efficiency standard. So minimum performance is to be more than 25% for most biomass cases and more than 30% for charcoal. So this is the minimum requirement. And any of these improved cooking stove should not increase an indoor air pollution with respect to the baseline scenario. So these all safeguards have been inbuilt in this methodology. To align with Article 6.4 standard, the business as usual scenario baseline survey is to be conducted. There has to be cross-check against published literature, any assessment against legal and policy context, adjustment for change in any baseline. If there is any change in the baseline with the annual usage survey, so that has to be updated. So as required by Article 6.4, the methodology also takes care of downward adjustment. If there has been material discrepancies, more than 10% variation in fuel usage or household size, there has to be a downward adjustment. Another default downward adjustment requires 1% with respect to the baseline year. So every year it has to be downward adjusted by 1%. But this requirement of downward adjustment is not applicable if a project demonstrates that the project is implemented under suppressed demand baseline. That means the total fuel consumption for cooking and heating should be less than 2.1 gigajoule per person per year. And the baseline survey is to be conducted completely digital. So it can be app-based. Baseline data is to be transmitted directly through cloud server on real-time basis. There is audit trail, including verification of IDs of authorized representative. There has to be geotagged photograph of the survey, and the assessment of all survey data is to be validated by the Carbon engine. So this software is already, a requirement if somebody is going to implement this methodology. Another requirement to align with Article 6.4 that the additionality is to be demonstrated according to the additionality tool of Article 6.4, starting with the step 1, demonstration of prior consideration, regulatory analysis, lock-in risk. All these requirements are to be met if this methodology is to be implemented. For common practice analysis, the penetration rate has been taken that if these devices have been penetrated more than 30%, the project is not additional. So less than 30%, it will qualify the common practice analysis. CTEC, as Elisa has already covered, there's continuous tracked energy consumption. So there are the methodology accommodate CTEC projects and non-CTEC project both, because this is possible that in most of the projects, the continuous tracking is not possible. So the methodology has both the provisions, but as soon as the monitoring level goes below, goes down, the credit will also go down. So this methodology has been designed in such a way that more monitoring is done, or the more credit can be issued under this methodology. So for CTEC project, some requirement of the monitoring schedule is that emission reduction estimation is to be prior to the validation. Baseline scenario survey prior to the validation, continuous measurement, if KPT approach has been taken, that also be prior to the validation. CCT approach is also allowed. For project studies, usage survey is to be done annually. Continuous measurement is to be done under KPT approach, or CCT approach is also possible. That has to be completed prior to the validation and at every monitoring period. But the monitoring period should not cross more than 2 years. If it is crossing, then the frequency should be met that the measurement CCT approach is to be conducted within 2 years' time. And there are other data requirements, then sales, service records, and project database all are to be maintained. The difference in non-CTEC project is that the baseline survey, that all initial requirement are to be conducted prior to validation. Baseline energy consumption measurement from KPTs are also prior to the validation. Usage survey is annual. Project energy consumption measurement from KPTs should be prior to at least before first verification and every monitoring period, but that should not cross more than 2 years. And other requirement of the monitoring data, sales, service record, project database are the requirement is to be maintained. So this methodology also include the digital monitoring requirement because this has been developed for Ascent World Bank Ascent program. And the target to apply this methodology is to issue the credit on real-time basis. So for that, obviously the data is to be continuously flow and then data to be validated, and then issuance can be done on real-time basis. Some of the parameters which will take some time, they will be monitored later, but most of the parameter, if CTEC monitoring is adopted, the real-time basis credit can be issued. So this digital framework include software solutions, data management, so that the immutability of collected data can be ensured. Auto estimation of emission reduction, that is predefined algorithm according to the methodology. There is already set in the software, and there is a transparent reporting to strengthen the credibility of emission reduction claim. So it is all set up in the software. So, and this methodology is the software will be following this methodology, and then this on-time issuance is possible with this methodology. The key feature of this methodology is going to be fully integration of DMRV, robust baseline and additionality assessment aligned with Article 6.4, accurate quantification of fuel displacement and emission reduction, and it minimize, not even minimize, it avoid over crediting. And this is scalable, and these methodologies can be applied for program of activities suitable for any large intervention across multiple regions. And it's, implement a strong safeguard for data integrity, verification, and absolutely ensure the confidence in the credits. This was whole in the methodologies for this. This methodology is already available publicly for public consultation. That period is over, but this will be soon finalized and will be published. But for any feedback or any information, if you want, I will be sharing my email ID in the chat box, and you can approach me now and later as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev. And it's very interesting to see how it has been applied in the case of Ascent. And as you said, that's a good moment because it's open for consultation in terms of methodology. So if anybody has any question, comments, please use the chat. And we really appreciate your presentation and your time here with us. With that, we'll move to our next part of this webinar, where we are looking specifically on carbon programs. So we discussed the methodologies. Now we will discuss some of the interventions associated with that. And we will start with Dan Radak, that you talk with a senior carbon finance specialist, and you'll be talking about the World Bank past experience from CDEV that was mentioned by Olivier in the beginning, and Rwanda case. So then very welcome. And from what we learned and what the lessons learned and what we're doing right now, we welcome your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to take a little bit of step back from all the details that we've just heard in terms of the methodology and kind of provide a wider lens on about carbon finance, about sort of our experience with carbon finance and about the lessons that we learned. I have 3 slides. Are we ready to show them?
Just give us a second.
Sure.
I can share it.
Okay.
I have the last one.
It's coming.
Great. So let's go to slide 1. Okay. So the World Bank's been involved. I mean, we go back 20 years in terms of providing, in terms of working on carbon finance with clean cooking. And in fact, our first project was with a carbon fund, which was called the Community Development Carbon Fund, which looked at community level projects, was not specifically energy access. And we worked on, I think many of you know, the Nepal biogas program, which is a really well-run program, and we were able to purchase emission reductions from that program. But really, as Olivia said, the real lessons that we learned, and really the experience that was most valuable, was through CDEV, which was another World Bank trust fund. CDEV is a what we call a carbon fund. It purchases emission reductions, so there's a purchase element to it, and it also does technical assistance, so it supports the project. And we did a total of actually 8 projects under CDEV. And as I wrote there, so there, I think it was a total of $47.8 million, which was in emission reduction purchase agreements to purchase up to 4.3 million ERs among, I think, and to date, or at least maybe this is a bit dated at this point, almost 10 million dispersed. With that said, experience is sometimes hard, sometimes easy. 4 of these 8 projects did not succeed for different reasons. Some were some of the companies. Some of the companies that we worked with went bankrupt. Sometimes the timing wasn't right. So, you know, carbon finance, we learn, you know, we are linked to the actual projects, to the companies that are working on them. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But we have kind of learned as we've gone, and we've learned as we've, you know, this is a learn by doing a little bit. And so, carbon finance is almost a reflection of how successful, in many ways, how successful the actual underlying operation is. So where we were successful, I think we just looking at the projects, we talk about the Ethiopia Clean Energy Program. We were successful in the Madagascar Ethanol Clean Cooking Program. I believe we're also successful in the Burkina Faso program. And of course, the Rwanda Energy Access Program, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we have these two funds. So we have the original Community Development Carbon Fund, which was not energy access focused. We go to this next fund, CDEV, which is very focused on energy access, not just clean cooking, but also electrification as well. And then we go now to Ascent. So just to understand the relationship with the roles of the World Bank, in both, our first generation of carbon funds, where we have the CDCF, the Community Development Carbon Fund, and CDEV, the World Bank is a trustee of these carbon funds. So we have donors, or really we call them fund participants, and they are, in CDEV, they are governments of in the UK, the Swiss Climate Center Foundation, and the Swedish Energy Agency, and these are donors, and so we're really working in that environment. With Ascent, we have a different relationship. The World Bank will not be purchasing emission reductions. Basically, we are more facilitating transactions and still supporting the projects, but it's a different relationship. And so as you can see, we're scaling these up. And so the important thing is, as we see the scale within CDEV, we're scaling it up from support to individual programs to national programs. So I think that's really an important concept here. And when we go to Ascent, we're really scaling it up to multiple national programs. So you can clearly see a scale here. And the issue is, as we scale, we really have to think about how we do things, because it's really important in terms of transaction costs and so forth. But let's go to the next slide, and we can talk through Rwanda a bit. So Rwanda is, of all the CDEV projects, we were working on different programs. This is really the fully national energy access program that we worked at. And from the World Bank's perspective, the carbon finance part of this project was really fully blended into the overall World Bank project. So really, I was part of that team that worked on this program from the very beginning. So it was really fully blended, and I think that is a really important element of this, because the carbon finance just didn't exist on its own. It existed in a very supported, well-supported program. But let's just focus on some of the important experiences and lessons that we can get from the Rwandan program. So I think, what's interesting is when we go into a national program, particularly one like Rwanda, and national programs can be different, but in Rwanda's program, they were engaging multiple companies. So it wasn't one single company. Some national programs do one company, or they have concessionaires, but we were working with multiple companies. So through the program, we were basically helping to providing emission reduction credits for the activities that were accomplished by, or activities that were implemented by different companies. And there were different technologies as well. So that is sort of one lesson. So if you look back at what happened in some of the CDEV projects, that if you invest in, it's a carbon finance engagement, if you are purchasing from one single company, there is more risk, because, maybe there's issues with the company or the technology. So when you deal, it's more of a portfolio approach. So basically you can protect yourself. But broadly, important point here is carbon finance just faces the same risks as any project. So normal, risks associated with financial closing, normal project operational risk. It does, however, have, certain special risks associated with carbon, and those that I'll talk to in a bit. One associated with monitoring, reporting, verification, and also regulatory risk. But, second lesson learned, it's just really important. Implementation support is just crucial through the whole process, as is normally for a World Bank project. Basically, a successful project means basically constant support. You want to build capacity in the implementing entities that we're working with. So we could see very quickly that over a period of monitoring periods, the implementing team who were carrying out all of the MRV work were getting quicker, better at it. So we could just basically see clear success as we supported implementation. The other thing I want to mention is just going back to the first discussion we just had was on the methodology. We used a methodology which was kind of a methodology which was what we call it. It's called the Standardized Crediting Framework. It was a national methodological approach, which basically served as sort of a bridge between the end of the CDM and the start of Article 6.4, adopting this, we adopted this CDM methodology, MS2G, and in 2021, which is considered quite conservative, but it was a methodology that was the standard was basically localized for Rwanda. So it was fit for the purpose of this program, which was helpful. It also was very useful in terms of helping to build capacity for Rwanda in terms of Article 6.2 readiness. So this helped manage to some extent the regulatory risk in terms of helping, because we were also supporting the SCF and basically ensuring while, in terms of the timing, but we were of issuance and the timing of different things, we were also ensuring integrity at the same time. MRV. So a really important lesson was that the Rwanda program was implementing something called results-based financing, which is an approach used in a lot of national programs for delivering energy access technologies, particularly stoves. It provides a subsidy for to homeowners, basically to cover the difference, the affordability gap. And carbon finance fits really well with RBF because the MRV systems that are adopted are quite close. So it's not very hard to align the MRV, which is designed for RBF, for carbon finance as well. So that's been very helpful. And then finally, the incentive model. So in Rwanda, the government decided that they would own all of the credits, that the companies would pass on those credits to the government, and that those credits, when they were monetized, would be used for additional incentives. In other words, the funding, the carbon revenues would flow back into the fund that was used for subsidy payments. Not every, as we talk about as we'll talk about in a minute in a set, this is a choice for every country how they want to do this. This seems to have worked in this case, but it's a different approach, and there are also downsides to this approach. So sometimes when you have Some companies that rely on a carbon finance model won't want to participate in a national program if they have to give up all of their carbon rights. So you end up typically with companies that have, or perhaps less well suited to basically take on that role to basically monetize their own emission reductions. So it's good for smaller companies in that sense, smaller clean cooking companies and so forth. So let me go to the next slide and just talk about how these lessons were applied to Ascent. So the main thing is scaling up. It's really important to reduce transaction costs. Even with the current standard that we use, carbon standard we use, requires a lot of work in terms of the traditional surveys and samples and to do emission reduction verification. So the decision for Ascent was to do a regional approach. So first, the regional approach basically scales up kind of the portfolio approach so that in a sense, you have now multiple programs instead of one national program, you have multiple programs. In some cases, as I mentioned, some of those programs are basically concessioning. So every program will be a bit different, but basically you can, in theory, you have a greater portfolio of emissions that are likely to be generated that you can purchase emission reductions from. So in theory, it should work better to help monetize the emission reductions. Implementation support remains crucial to build capacity. So in Ascent, a lot of that work for capacity building is moving to a regional entity, COMESA. And also the support goes beyond supporting monitoring, reporting, verification to also supporting transactions to help with to facilitate the monetization. And we also continue to support Article 6 readiness as well. Now, Sandeep was talking about where we intend to use the energy access standard that Sanjeev was talking about, another fit for purpose crediting or carbon standard, this time leveraging digital technologies. The digital technologies will, we hope, reduce transaction costs where possible and ensure greater integrity. So it's basically, we can't continue. I mean, we did well with the data systems we had in Rwanda, but what we expect is to basically continue to upgrade that. And that's important because I think, as was mentioned, better integrity is linked to better price. It's also lower transaction costs. It's also faster, in theory, to market, to get those emission reductions to market, particularly if there is connectivity to devices, which leads us to MRV. Also, so important, we had robust platforms in Rwanda, but there was a need to basically improve those platforms. So the idea is to move to platforms that are commercial, which can be easily, which are built for RBF, which can more easily be connected regionally. So platforms like Prospect or Odyssey, these can also easily support carbon finance, in which we've, in certain cases in Ascent countries, we've already implemented this. And then finally, incentive model. As I mentioned, clients will have different models that they will use for carbon finance. Some will share carbon finance with companies that that are working with the government. Others may want to hold the ownership of that and just provide basically use the carbon revenue to basically, like in Rwanda, to supplement the funding they already have. Ultimately, carbon finance is needed to support the financing gap for reaching the M300 goals in each of the countries. And there's only a limited amount of public money to do that. So ultimately, there's a need to move fully at some point, or to make carbon finance to graduate companies in some extent to carbon finance. Depends on the country, but the idea is that at some point you're going to run out of publicly financed incentives, and you're going to need to have the private sector provide carbon finance. So I think there's the longer term is to have carbon finance come in. It really depends how that will be done in each country. And I'll end it here. Thank you.
And it's very interesting to see how this story goes. And also, I think I would love to underline this relationship between the RBF, the platform, and how, based on that and related with that, carbon credit can be built in a kind of more sustainable and stable way in terms of how it works. I think it's a very interesting lesson learned, especially looking the case of Rwanda and how Ascent has been developed. So thank you so much. And still keeping on the examples and the bank experience part of it, we would love to now talk a little bit with the Ghana example. That's another example. And here you have the people on the ground, the head of carbon market office in the Environmental Protection Agency in Ghana. That will be, we have the pleasure to talk with them to see how it was done. And then we will have the senior officer of the World Bank on the outcome bond as well on Ghana. So please, Dr. Danielle Tutu Benoff, you are there, the floor is yours. So, Danielle, can you hear us? If I cannot hear you, what I will do is that I will try to change the order and look on the colleagues from the World Bank Treasury on the outcome bond. That's a very interesting example and a very innovative way on looking on that, on clean cooking. And you have both Ariel and Steen, you are there?
Hi, yes, Michelle, we are here and you're happy to go ahead in the presentation.
That would be very good. I really appreciate that. So if you can share, yeah, that's perfect.
Yes, thank you so much for the slide. So happy to kick off to give an overview and summary of the case study of the Clean Cooking Outcome Bond that we've issued in December of last year. Yeah, hopefully this serves as a good case study of the carbon finance and how this facilitates the project in clean cooking. So last year in December, we issued the Clean Cooking Outcome Bond. This was the 200 million structured bond issuance that mobilized $30.5 million to support a clean cooking projects in Ghana. So I'll just briefly describe the mechanism of the bond just at a high level. So essentially this bond that we issued at World Bank Treasury was able to mobilize 30.5 million via the coupon structure to be dispersed to the clean cooking projects. And in return, a portion of the yield that investors receive from investing in this bond will be linked to the generation of carbon credits from the clean cooking projects. So looking closer at the clean cooking projects themselves, Essentially, the projects that were supported by the outcome bond financing involved the distribution of more than 400,000 clean cooking devices to households in Ghana. And this aims to replace or displace more inefficient forms of biomass-based cooking. In this project, the cook stoves were distributed to households at a heavily subsidized rate, which is enabled by the future sales of carbon credit revenues from the stoves. And actually, there are two sub-projects contained within this transaction. Namely, there's one sub-project that is linked to the distribution of electric cook stoves, and another linked to the distribution of improved charcoal cook stoves, which are both targeted at different types of households. Effectively, these two projects will be expected to generate carbon emissions reductions. And in this case, it was these carbon emissions reductions or carbon credits will be verified and issued as ITMOs or internationally transferred mitigation outcomes under Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. So it is worth highlighting that this is a private company project and not a World Bank project. So next, I will briefly discuss the key parties involved in the transaction. So firstly, of course, we have the World Bank Treasury as the issuer of the Clean Cooking Outcome Bond. We have been issuing similar types of outcome bonds since 2021 that mobilize financing for development projects. At the same time, we have the bond investors on the left-hand side who invest in the bond, and they are the ones that are exposed to the performance risk of the project. Essentially, if the project generates fewer ITMOs than expected from the cook stoves, the investors will receive a lower than expected return. In the middle of the slide, we can see the commercial bank involved in the transaction. In this case, it was Standard Chartered Bank. The commercial bank acts as a financial intermediary of the transaction and was also involved in structuring the bond. And one of the key roles that they have is channeling the flow of funds between the bond and the projects. The 30.5 million disbursements from the bond to the project, as well as the ITMO revenues from the project developer back to the bond to be shared with the bond investors. For the rest of the time here, I would also like to focus a bit more on the two remaining parties involved in the transaction, which are here the project developer as well as the off-taker that they have secured. The project developer here is a private carbon project developer company headquartered in East Africa, and its name is Up Energy, and they have a strong track record of implementing carbon reduction projects in Africa. How this opportunity came to be was that World Bank Treasury was actually introduced to Up Energy by the commercial bank, Standard Chartered Bank, and the bank was familiar with the World Bank Treasury's program of issuing outcome bonds, and believed that this project was to be a good fit for our outcome bonds. As such, they initiated the discussion between the parties. It is also worth highlighting that at the time when we first engaged with the project developer, Up Energy, they had already secured an offtake agreement for the carbon credits from the project. But at the same time, they were underway in the Article 6.2 bilateral authorization process. So as part of the process, they are required to obtain full project review of the design and methodology from both governments of Switzerland and Ghana, the buyer and the seller governments. And we determined that a full authorization in terms of the receipt of the letters of authorization from both governments was to be a prerequisite for the bond issuance. And finally, here we have also the off-taker of the ITMOs in this transaction. And here it is the CLIC Foundation in Switzerland. So it is also a private foundation that has been mandated under the Swiss CO2 Act to fulfill some of the offsetting obligations from the motor fuels sector in the country. And they do so by supporting emissions reductions projects nationally and internationally. And they are one of the big Article 6 buyers globally. In this case, the ITMOs purchased by the CLIC Foundation will be used to meet Switzerland's emission reduction targets under its nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. So finally, I will briefly discuss what are some of the key elements that helped with this transaction. First aspect is to talk about the Article 6 element. So as part of the Article 6 authorization process, as mentioned, the project design and methodology undergoes multiple layers of review and approval, including by both governments. And as well as these multiple layers of review at the government side, the project was also extensively reviewed by the off-taker, which also embedded some of its requirements into the project design. It was also reviewed by the commercial bank, and all these elements gave comfort ultimately to the investors in the outcome bond of the high quality nature of the project. The World Bank also conducted our own internal due diligence review of the project risks, and suitability in the local context. But of course, this is different type of review from the typical review that is conducted for World Bank finance projects. Another element to highlight on the methodology front is that we understood that this project builds on existing methodologies from the gold standard, and also embeds additional conservative requirements. So for the EC's project, it is built upon the MECD, the metered and measured energy cooking device methodology from gold standard. And for IC, the improved charcoal cook stoves, it is based on the TPDD TEC methodology. But further, it incorporates additional conservative elements, such as using a conservative parameter for the fraction of non-renewable biomass, FNRB, of 30%, which is much lower than the previous projects in Ghana. As well as using other elements like dynamic baselines and digital monitoring. Another element that really supported the transaction was the existence of the signed offtake agreement between Up Energy and the Click Foundation. The offtake agreement essentially established a fixed price and volume for the purchase of carbon credits that would have been generated from the project over its life. So this was important in supporting the financial structure of the outcome bond, and it also eliminates an aspect of the carbon price risk from the project. Finally, it's also worth highlighting the numerous co-benefits that the project would generate. And while these are not directly embedded in the project's financial structure, these co-benefits are important to all the stakeholders involved in this page, as well as and it was a key focus from the investor side as well. And the co-benefits that we highlighted to investors included the economic benefits to households, such as having reduced fuel costs, the local job opportunities that are involved in the manufacturing or distribution of the cook stoves, the health benefits from the reduced pollution, indoor air pollution, and finally also the gender benefits from saving women in particular some time to engage in other social and professional activities. I think with that, I think I will pass the time back to Michelle for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a very innovative mechanism, and there is a lot of curiosity about how it has been established and how it be implemented. Unhappily, Dr. Daniel Bonifant will not be able to join us because he has a connection issue. So I think we have some time, and I would love to use this time for question and answer. Usually you always run with all the presentations and don't give a space for people to actually raise some questions. So I would start with the questions that I have in the chat. If the speakers allow me, I would ask them to open their cameras if possible to keep the discussion. And I would start from the end to the beginning in terms of questions. And if there is any other question on the audience, please, that's your moment. So I would start with the question about the specifically on the clean cooking outcome bond presentation. And they ask if there is any information about the subsidy of the price of the EPCs and ICS, and if there is any information about the liters, if I'm talking about a big 6 liters or 8 liters, what are the kind of information we have about the technology? Ariel, do you have any information that you could share with us?
Yes. Yeah, I think we wouldn't be able to share the exact figures, but I think we believe that the cook stove subsidy was around maybe 70 to 80% of the market selling price of these cook stoves. And in terms of the capacity and size, I think we do not have this information, but we can try to get it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate that. And then I go to the following question that's for you, Daniel. Radak, on the RBF, right? That's one of the, because the question here, it's a little bit if there is any upfront budget for the RBF recipients. And I think that's an interesting question, especially look on ascent. That's a challenge. It's usually a challenge that we have. And yeah, just want to hear from you in the case of Rwanda and in the case of ascent, how the different components may play.
So when you talk about RBF budget, are you talking about the level of the incentive applied? RBF subsidy?
Yeah, that's what I understand. I don't know if Camille, you are there and want to.
So I could say a few words just in general because I don't know exactly the budget. So Rwanda has enough information about the households to be able to provide an income adjusted subsidy. So I know it goes, and this is a guess off the top, but I know it at the highest end for the poorest households, it's up to 90%. I don't know the exact amount, and then or the absolute amount, but it's up to 90% of the price of a stove is subsidized, and that can go, and then it may be down around 40% for wealthier households at that end of it. So there's a range, and I think it's either 4 or 5 tiers in that range. So it depends if countries have that kind of information. They might often do that type of subsidy. It really depends on it, how the energy access, but in the clean cooking component is designed, whether it's just targeting certain sectors or if it's targeting the broad population.
Thank you so much. Then I think that give us some of the Camille, you have your hands up if you want to open the mic. And first present yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Camille from Ethiopia, and I'm working in the clean cooking sector. My question is, in the case of RBF, do you give upfront budgets for the companies, especially for who are distributing these stoves? Because the capacity of these enterprises is relatively weak. So did you do that in your implementation? That's what I want to ask.
Yeah, this is somewhat outside my expertise because I focus on the carbon finance part. So I can't even speak about Rwanda. There may be, in some cases, some sort of working capital that might be provided. I'm not 100% sure. Every program, it can be done differently. And I'm sure, Michelle, ESMAP's done sort of a comparison of RBF, right?
Yeah, I may help here. So I think that's the RBF. There is different designs, and usually it's not just RBF. When you do a design of an intervention on clean cooking, we have several components, right? In the case of Ascent, it's very interesting because there is different components. It's just not just the RBF, not just the carbon credit, but you also have the equity, you have the technical assistance, and that builds the ecosystem. We understand that in several countries, there is this problem of working capital to the companies to achieve that. So often there is some complement in terms of the intervention. And also we can have different trigger on the RBF. So the trigger can be the delivery, but you can start with trigger associated with the availability of the stove. So that can be a way also to work a little bit with this timeline. But usually or often there is a complementary instrument to allow the companies to have equity or work capital to be able to implement the RBF. I hope I helped to answer the question, but yeah, that's beyond carbon in some way.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I will keep moving a little bit on the questions here if there is nobody with raising hands, and I go to the methodology. And one of the questions that was addressed to Elisa, and Elisa, you start to answer, but I will bring you. And then if the colleagues that also discuss the methodology want to complement and bring some elements, you'll be very welcome as well. And it's the idea of addressing non-permanence and reversals in mechanism methodologies. So I want to bring you your view, Elisa, and then if the other two colleagues want to comment on how the methodologies that they are looking on that, that's welcome.
Yeah, so the idea of non-permanence or reversals is that the risk that the emissions reductions that the project generates are then somehow emitted later, right? So an easy example to imagine is like if you have a reforestation project and you like build up this stand of trees, but what if there's a forest fire and those trees burn down and then like all that carbon that you saved is re-emitted? So then that would be an example of a non-permanence or reversal risk. So that's a concept that is applied and considered for all carbon projects across the board. And in the case of the clean cooking sector, it's very complicated to evaluate that risk. There is no scientific consensus about how to do that, right? Because when we do a clean cooking project, we don't know where those trees that might have been cut down are coming from, or like how to identify what biomass is getting saved from where, including like it could very easily be outside the project boundary, especially in the case of charcoal, for example, right? Charcoal gets converted and transported across long distances. So there's no current model for how to identify the biomass saved by a clean cooking project, and no specific tools that one could do that with. And some would argue that, the family was gonna cook anyway, so whether or not that tree that got saved burned down versus another, the savings accrued regardless, right? Like the cooking was going to happen anyway. So it's very complicated for our sector. There is no clear way to evaluate for it. So it's an ongoing issue in the clean cooking sector. And this is one of the real challenges with something like, Article 6 is that you're trying to create rules that can apply to all sectors, but all sectors are very different from each other. And some of those applications of a rule will make a lot of sense, deforestation, and sometimes it won't. And the trick is figuring out what the flexibility is. And as Andres pointed out in the comments, there is some flexibility around this issue right now for clean cooking. And, 4C has always taken the a crowdsourcing approach. We never claim to be the arbiters of all knowledge and knowledge generation. So we're continuing to work with Gold Standard and UNFCCC and all the stakeholders in the sector who are willing to engage with us about how to move this issue forward in a way that doesn't sabotage all clean cooking projects and is realistic for actual risks of those projects compared to other sectors that have much higher risk of non-permanence. So welcome all and any inputs as we have been doing for the last 5 years. We're eager to have contributions from all the other experts out there.
Thank you so much, Elisa.
Yeah, I would like to add here that we need to focus what the project activity is. And in clean cooking stoves, we are reducing emissions with respect to a baseline where the emissions had been more, and in project activity, the emissions are less. So we are talking about emission reduction. It's not removal. So we are not talking about any carbon removal by the trees which has been saved. So there is no direct risk directly here. It is emission reduction, and that's why I don't see focusing on the project activity boundary that there is a possibility of any reversal directly from there.
Thank you so much. And as you have your microphone open, I go to a question here in the chat that's for you, Sanjeev, and then I go back to you, Sami. But I just want to ask about under the DMRV methodology, how much flexibility do project developers have in owning and selling the carbon credits that they generate? Are there any restriction on where these credits can be sold to manage double reporting?
There is no restriction. Actually, this is completely who established the ownership of the credit. And if somebody has established this ownership, then they are free to sell in any of the market. They are the owner, and there is no restriction coming from the DMRV. So they are free to sell anywhere where they want to.
Thank you so much. And then I go back to you, Samir. I guess you can think about the other two questions if there is anything that we want to add, but I want to add one of the questions here that was specifically on developing carbon credit projects for e-cooking. And they are bringing the challenge associated with additional cost of the MRV, and especially for a small business in the clean cooking. So they are the Dorothy asked that this can be a challenge for a small business in clean cooking sector, particularly for female entrepreneurs in Africa, making it difficult to remain relevant in the clean cooking sector. So she asked, how can this made possible to enter the carbon credits projects, thinking about the cost of the MRV, e-cooking, and yeah, if you have any view on that, and then I can open to the other colleagues as well, if there is any point on that.
Yeah, do you want me to come in, Michelle, on that one?
Yes, please.
No, yeah, I mean, in terms of the small scale project developers, there's a issue of scale, right? So, I mean, from a financing perspective, as was mentioned earlier, I think there could be a couple of ways in terms of, doing some kind of a revolving fund and providing working capital as consistent terms, But from a technological DMRV perspective, I think we are working on some of the solutions that are now going to be much more cheaper, I guess. How we are thinking about now at the range of also 10 to 20 pounds on top of the electric cooking devices, which are now also mentioned in the range of 100 to 150 if you look at the African context. So I mean, going forward, it's not going to be too costly. It won't be in terms of the portion of the overall cost of operation. That's what my expectation is. The other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, the aftermath of doing such kind of DMRV in terms of integrity is the prices that we, of course, get from the market in terms of the early offtake agreements that was mentioned earlier also. So I mean, there are more positives if we were able to, both from a financing perspective as well as from a technical perspective, make it easier for a small scale project developers to adopt these technologies based on these different methodologies. So yeah, I think going forward, there's expectation that the cost is going to get reduced further for the small scale project developers. And further on, if I may, on the reversal risk, could I come also? Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, I thought there are two. At the moment, in terms of the infrastructure, also laid out earlier, also with respect to especially FNRB and the use of Morpheus model, but then also there are other tools earlier. One of the ways going forward could be in terms of looking at it from two different perspectives. One is the systemic risk, systemic risk that previous colleagues also mentioned, which is very difficult to address. But if we were to address that, perhaps some kind of integration with the model that we have, like Morpheus model, and looking at the parameters of how the systemic reversal risks happen together with the other parameters that are in the FNRB tool. So we could have an integrated FNRB value, for the country that could be used to discount this kind of reversal risk one. But then in terms of the random risk, I think that happens. It's much more easier to identify, like, something like a fire in 10 years time due to climate change. So for that, some kind of a buffer pool, which is being discussed at this point in time, and project developers could assign some portion of their credits to those buffer pools and could be used for that kind of random risk, But for the systemic risk, I think probably we need to work on a little bit more. But our thinking is perhaps it could be integrated in some of the work that is already being carried out, like for the case of FNRB tool use of Morpheus model. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I don't know if Elisa or Sanjeev want to comment anything more on this associated with the cost of the DMRV, and yeah, and also I guess related with this more general question about how much you believe that you are in this business, carbon credit finance can deliver clean cook in Africa, what we can expect in some ways.
Yeah, I'll just jump in real quick and say, so I think we've seen that there's been tremendous growth in access to clean cooking as a result of direct result of carbon finance activities. So I am very optimistic about carbon finance continuing to be a crucial method of expanding energy access. And I also want to flag the very optimistic data point that we are seeing higher and higher purchase prices for high integrity credits, which can really, the idea is, our hope was that these higher costs of like all the different higher integrity costs, including but not exclusive to DMRV, could be offset by higher prices that buyers are willing to pay. And we are in fact seeing that. You know, we at CCA have been really advocating hard among our buyer colleagues and friends that if you want good projects, you have to pay for them. And that means like $25 to $40 a ton. And they are stepping up and doing that. So that's a really encouraging sign for our market.
And I would like to add in DMRV that DMRV is to reduce the cost. It is not just to adding the cost, because this is going to bring the finance faster. If we are going to talk about ESMAP program, it is going to be real-time issuance, means you are going to sell the credit immediately, you are going to get the finance immediately. So along with the time, obviously the DMRV cost will be lesser, but at the same time, if you are getting the finance faster, it is going to make it easy to implement more projects.
Yeah, let me offer a slightly nuanced view. I think, ultimately, I think as the technology starts, certainly for electric cooking, certain types of modern cooking, you're going to have more connectivity there that is built into these devices. It'll be easier to connect and to do all the digital DMRV. I think obviously for more improved cook stoves, that's gonna, that will be a bit of a transition. We're hoping to kind of do the work to see how we can integrate stove use monitors and other devices to basically kind of bridge that kind of digital divide. I think the other challenge is buyers are not going to want to buy little bits of emission reductions. So we need to think about how they can be aggregated. And I understand, once you hit kind of the digital side, there's a way, and this is not my area either, but, through what's called tokenization, where you can buy, where it can be kind of grouped into larger amounts and bought up by buyers. But I think this will be a challenge as well. So I think this will be a transition period, and I think it'll be easier for large programs to do this. The regional approach is probably the right way to go right now, and hopefully we can kind of, through the work we'll do on kind of bridging the digital divide and this, find a way for smaller entities to basically take advantage of the carbon finance market or carbon market.
Thank you so much, Samir.
Just wanted to come up on that in terms of methodology. There's already this umbrella approach, which is called program of activities. So if governments are more and the bigger project developers are more active, that smaller project developers governments could ensure that small project developers can come within that umbrella, So yeah, just in terms of the implementation of how small project developers would think going forward with more of the digital, solutions coming forward. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Sanjeev.
Michelle, yeah, I would like to add this last point in DMRV that there is a cost of validation and verification also involved in any project developer in carbon credit development. So with DMRV, I believe that this validation and verification cost will also reduce. So if we are talking about only the implementation part where the technology may need some extra investment, but ultimately this will also reduce the cost to earn the carbon credit because the validation and verification cost will be less, should be less, what I believe.
We
You
see
want me to
that
answer
this
the
brings
cocoa
a
question?
lot of question and discussion, right? Do you want to come in then?
Yeah, I mean, I thought there'd be a cocoa question at some point today. So I'm not fully up on all the details of cocoa. It's obviously been in the news. I've seen a million articles cross my email. I can say this. I think as governments are getting, I think one issue is government readiness to participate in Article 6.2. And I just think, as that capacity improves, you're going to see less issues that came up with cocoa. So I think it's an issue with, to a large extent, in terms of regulatory unpreparedness at this point. That's my personal view, and I'm hoping that as governments get more experience and have the tools to really understand what their NDCs and the implications of authorization are, this will be a more routine and predictable process going forward.
Thank you so much. On the, I see one question here from Q&A. It's very bank related. Do you want to come in and talk and ask the question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So
Thank
my
you.
question is, when the World Bank passed the funding from the bond, right, to the commercial bank, Standard Chartered Bank, is this in the form of a grant or a loan to the commercial bank, right? And when the commercial bank pass on the funding for the cook stores program, do they provide loans to the project developer, or they provide grant to the project developer, or they just provide grant directly to the households to buy the cook stores?
Yeah, happy to answer that. Essentially the funding that is provided from the outcome bond through Standard Chartered Bank to the project developer, it is neither a loan nor grant to Standard Chartered Bank. So the role of the bank is mainly to act as an intermediary to transfer the funds between World Bank and the project developer. So they will be facilitating the flow of funds for the initial disbursement, as well as subsequently from the ITMO revenues from the project back to the bond. And these are captured in various agreements between World Bank and SCB, as well as between SCB and the project developer.
So SCB is acting like fund administrators for the disbursement, but the funding that the World Bank pass on to the developer, that is just a grant. Does the developer need to pay back?
So I think Ariel has tried very eloquently to illustrate a complex financial transaction for a cook store audience. What I think she demonstrates is there's a multiplicity of different actors that play different roles in this large transaction. If you look at it exclusively from the perspective of the project developer here, what they receive is upfront financing in return for giving up part of the future flows that they get from the carbon credits that are pre-sold. So the project developer gets funding upfront in return for that, they commit to giving up future revenues from these carbon credits. That comes at a cost, right? This is commercial financing. In the end, the risks, the price risk is borne by the off-taker. The delivery risk is taken by the bond investors. So they receive the funding. They give up part of these future revenues that they were otherwise entitled to. So that's the financial transaction. It's not a grant because they give up these other future revenues, and if the project succeeds, there'll be a positive return to the investors that are commercial investors. But if they don't succeed, if somehow the credits are not generated or fewer credits are generated than anticipated, then the bond investors may suffer a loss. And it's not, the project developer is not on the hook to repay the bond investors in this case. So it's not a loan, because a loan would be an obligation of the developer to repay. And it's not a grant because they give up something else in return. But it is a sort of financing where the bond investors participate in the delivery risk of the carbon credits. They don't take the price risk. The price risk is borne by the off-taker. And so that's part of the beauty of the structure, because the price risk is really hard to assess for these projects. So I hope that gave you a little bit of a sense of how this works from the,
Thank you. It's clear now. So the World Bank is on the hook to repay to the investors, not the developers. Yeah.
The World Bank does not take risk here either. We intermediate between the commercial bank and the bond investors. So the bond investors are the ones taking the risk here.
And the demand's taking the risk, right? It's the off-taker who takes the price risk in some way. Steen, can you present yourself?
Oh, sorry. So, Steen, Ariel and I are in the World Bank Treasury. So we are in the capital market facing part of the World Bank. We are on the funding team here. Most of what that team does is issue bonds to finance the activities of the World Bank. We have a small team here that we call structured finance and market solutions, where we do things with the capital market that intermediate something for our clients. And so in this case, it was delivery of carbon credits in a cook stove projects, and this is part of our outcome bonds. We do other things like that, but we sit in the finance complex of the bank and we face the capital markets. Ariel and I sit here next to each other.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that has been a very interesting discussion. We hope we can have the Ghana representative in another session to know a little bit from the government perspective. But I think on this session we are finalized. Yeah, we just to try to finalize in time. I just want to thank everybody, and to conclude, I think few words just to say that we see that there is a clear interest on the carbon market. Even if we know that's not silver bullet, I think that's very important to say that carbon is not solving all the problems. It's not the only source of funding for clean cooking. I think that's very important when you are designing our interventions. But it is a powerful and evolving tool. It's something that's moving, you are learning, it's getting more credibility, get more trust, and it will be important in the process of acceleration, the transition of clean cooking, as we know. And the ability to mobilize result-based finance at scale, it's very important. And there is different instruments. I think the outcome bond, it's a very interesting way to look how it can mobilize in different parts of this value chain. Can be through topping up on the result-based finance, but also can be on the equity side. So I think that's very to show the different parts of it. And how this credibility is built, it's very, very important. So you need to strengthen integrity, transparent in the system, and that's why the methodologies that we discuss here, it's so important. And I'm very glad to say that even if there is different methodologies, there is a process of harmonization of this. And I think that's very important for clean cooking, to have a very strong harmonization and alignment of the different methodologies on the sector. And also, I really think that's important to think about also the roles of policies and regulation of the market, carbon markets in the countries, to see how clean cooking can be beyond the voluntary market. Even for the voluntary market, it's important, but beyond the voluntary market. And you have been seeing different countries adopting very different perspectives on that. Some of them are looking for more public-led, some are looking for more private-led, and also some are including on the 6.2, some are excluding clean cooking of the 6.2 as not a priority, which is something that I guess we all need to be aware. And as you discussed it with all the process with the UNFCCC, how the 6.4 you'll be playing a role. I think that's some elements that you'll be seeing in terms of a regulatory framework forward. When you think about the digitalization, I think that opens a lot of possibilities, not just about the measure of verification for carbon, but for other outcomes. Because when you have a good measurement and verification, you support, I think, as Dan said, you do the RBF well in some way, then we have other outcomes beyond carbon. Carbon, it is the one that there is a price, there is a market, but there is other outcome, and even climate-related outcome beyond carbon credit. If you think about climate-related finance, it's much bigger space, and for some context may make more sense than carbon credits in terms of transaction cost, or because of the regulation of the country is in a different way. So with that, and with 1 minute to end it, I really want to thank everybody again. I'm very happy to see that we have about 2 hours, a large group, and a really good discussion. I think it gives practical insights and inspiration for engage on this space, but also beyond that, and on the practical part, on the implementation of this project, that we're all working together on that. So thank you so much, and I appreciate that, and I hope we will meet together in the next session of these webinars on clean cooking or in the other platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle and all. Bye.